So welcome along tonight. I guess the big thing is there are plenty of opportunities for us to get involved in export marketing, lots of opportunities with global stuff. The real question is, should we get involved? And so tonight we're going to talk about a few things. We'll talk about when. So are you ready to export? And will you be, are you capable? Some where stuff around assessing the markets and where do we need to go in terms of markets. And then the last one is on how we're going to do that. And that's about how do you do a bit more of a detailed feasibility and how you build some plans around where we're going to go with marketing. So the first question is, are you ready to export? And it's a really big question because the temptation is huge. And the temptation comes from well-meaning advisors, family, friends, and, fools down the pub who are quite happy to say, your product would be fantastic. You should be exporting because that's where all the money is, all that sort of stuff. So you get that sort of pressure from beyond. You have potential distributors may ring you up and contact you and say, look, we've just seen your product online. We'd love your distributed product in, insert country of choice. Abyssinia or wherever, and you go, wow, well, the Abyssinians are really keen. Maybe we should export to there, and then you'll have customers. Maybe you're doing some online business, and people see it, and people say, wow, that'd be great if you would deliver that product here. If we could buy that product locally. But the big question is, you get all these things, and the question is, should you export? So, are you ready to export? Is the big challenge. So what we've done and developed is an export, I guess, diagnostic, if you like. So some export factors. So what I want you to do now is just, as I work through these factors, we're going to break the key factors down. I'd like you to just grab a piece of paper and just score yourself on each of these factors. And just as we work through them, so I want you to use a -5 to +5 scale. So you just got to scribble it down on a piece of paper. Nobody's going to see your answers. So where -5 is poor, 0 is an average score, and +5 is excellent. Now, the reason we use -5 to +5 instead of 0 to 10 is you actually have to think about the score. So what happens is we use a 0 to 10 scale. Most people put a 7 or a 3. Yeah, and I want you to actually think a bit more carefully about that. So it's just a tool for getting you to think a bit more carefully about the particular issue. So let's look at these factors. So the first factor is domestic market performance. Now, the big thing here is your current performance needs to be good, because otherwise, how do you think you're going to perform in an export market if you can't perform in the domestic market? So if you can't really make it work in Australia, why do you think that taking on China is going to help? And I know we get all this stuff where people say, oh, there's 6 million people, 6 billion people over there, 1 billion people. If we only get them to buy one sock each, then we'd be multi-millionaires. Yeah, that's okay. But if you can't sell socks to people in Australia, why do you think you're going to sell them to people in China? All right, it's the first thing. So rate yourself -5 to +5 on domestic market performance. All right. The second one then is think about international trade experience. Okay. So what understanding do you have of international trade? Managing exchange rate differentials and those sorts of things. Tax. International tax is very different. So what are the tax implications for you exporting out of Australia? And then how will your product be taxed in its country of choice? Contracts and agreements and those sorts of things. You need to be across those sort of things. And then just the logistical issues of getting a product out of Australia and importing it into another country can be quite high. So what do you know about those things? So what do you know about what's required to get the product in and out? So where would you rate your international trade experience? -5 to +5. Put out a number. International travel experience. It might sound silly, but lots of people haven't travelled that much. And if you're going to take on an export market, you're probably going to want to go and visit and see your product in those markets and do things. So how are you in terms of things like cultural sensitivity? Very different cultures, and you need to be, you're going to be addressing these cultures and working in these cultures. So you need to be across them. Yeah, technology. How are you going to be at setting up technology and adjusting to technology on the run, where you'll have, you're going to have to log into hotspots and do other things. You may not have all the technology at your fingertips you have now. Food, if you've got lots of dietary restrictions and stuff, you may have trouble when you travel, because it's not possible to get gluten-free in every country you go to, or vegan, or whatever you want. So you may have to think about your food and those sorts of things, and accommodations. Your idea of 5-star and their idea of 5-star accommodation could be very, very different. So just thinking about that, you probably wouldn't give all these the same weighting, but that's one that you need to consider. Yeah, -5 to +5. Where are you in terms of international travel experience? All right. Fourth step: process documentation and quality. So what do you need? So what's your understanding of the process documentation required to export out of Australia and import into another country? What's required there? Quality accreditation. What quality accreditations may make it easier for you to export? So what do you really need in this space? So what's your understanding of what's required to export your product to somewhere else? Okay, -5 to +5. Give yourself a number. All right, spare management capacity. It's going to take time and energy to do this. Who's going to do it? If you think you're just going to layer it on top of everything else you're going to do, you probably should think again, because exporting can be time consuming. You've got to travel, you've got to do things. It takes time to build relationships and markets in a foreign country. So you're going to have some spare management capacity in your business. So who will do this? So where are you in terms of spare management capacity? Yeah. Production capacity. Can we scale up? Everybody thinks, oh yeah, it'll be just fantastic. But I've had clients in the past where we've even just looked at our local department stores here in Australia, and they've said, yeah, we'd love to take your product on. And the trial shipment that we had to send them was a full year's production for us. So that wasn't a proper order. That was just a little trial they were going to run. So sometimes you've got to think about what's the scale of what you're planning to do, and what's your production capacity like? How scalable is it? So where are you in terms of scaling up? -5 to +5. Just pick a number. Marketing promotional materials. Are you ready to go? So you may not have websites in different languages and those sorts of things, but is it relatively easy for you to do that? Do you have a good website at the moment? Do you have good promotional materials? Do you have the capacity to convert some of this into a foreign language? It's relatively easy with all the great services around at the moment, but where are you in terms of marketing promotional materials? For a start, if you don't have a great website in your existing market, then you score yourself low. Okay? -5 to +5. Zero's average. All right. Financial strength. How are you going to fund this? All right. So working capital requirements will normally increase. So if you're shipping a physical product in particular, it's certainly going to increase. And even a service will increase your working capital requirements. Because you've got a physical product, just think about it, you either air freight it, which means your costs will go up, or you'll sea freight it, which will take longer and cost less, but it takes longer. So if your product is going to spend 6 weeks on the ocean, getting from Australia to the destination, by the time you get it through ports and all those sorts of things, you've got to build that time frame in, and you've got to be able to fund that working capital, all right? Because you don't get paid instantly necessarily, all right? Now, there are ways around that, but you need to think about it. Your working capital will normally increase. What's your level of drive and passion for export? Exporting is not about being a fair weather partner, and in the past, Australia has a bit of a reputation for being a fair weather trading partner, particularly in horticulture and agricultural produce, when the only time we exported was when the domestic market was not performing well, so we exported and then we weren't there again. So you need to be there for the long term. This is about building consistent, high-quality relationships with your trading partners, and you need to be there for the long haul. So what's your level of drive and passion for export? -5 to +5 again. And then your business model. Is there sufficient margin in your product to allow you to ship it overseas and still have a price that is going to be competitive in the market? How are you going to handle inter-country pricing? Because what might be a fair price in one country may not be a fair price in another country. And so how are you going to juxtapose those two things and do that? And distribution. How are you planning to distribute your product in this country, in this new country? So how robust is your business model in terms of layering a whole bit of extra costs and things into it? -5 to +5. Okay. So how do we go? So the first thing, I want you to think about in this model is, what's your total score look like? So just quickly run down and add it up in your head. Give you a couple of minutes to do that. If you're like me, you might need a calculator or more fingers, whichever way it is. All right, so run down and put it in there. So run it down, and then if your score is minus 50 to minus 5, right? So it really means you need some more preparation required. Okay, so you're going to need to do some more prep before you start to export because you're not export ready. All right, minus 4 to plus 20, you're export ready, but you need to plan really well. You need to get your planning right, and there's a whole heap of things that you'll probably need to focus on. 20 and above, you're ideally placed to export, but I still encourage you to do your planning really well. All right, so that's the sort of overall score. But if you look at it and say, okay, well, regardless, I'm going to think about exporting anyhow, which many of you will do. What are the lowest 3 scores? Because these are the areas you need to work on. So just pick one of those low scores and tell me, type it into the question box just type it in the question box. Just let me know what your lowest score is, just so I get a feel for where people are sitting. Okay, international trade experience. Cool, that's one we're going to have to work on. Production capacity. Yeah, not sure if we can scale up. Yep, excellent. Yeah, and you really have to think about that because scaling actually can be a big challenge for you in terms of capital. What's we got there? Yeah, domestic market performance. Yeah, you do need to perform well in that domestic market. And I guess the reason why I probably thought about some of these doing this actual webinar was I've been doing some mentoring days lately, and we may even have some people from some of those mentoring days online with us tonight. But really interesting that I think of the 5 of the 6 businesses that I spoke to were all looking to export, yet none of them were performing particularly well in Australia, and I find that quite scary that we're going to race out and just think we're going to be good. Yep. What else we got here? We've got spare management capacity. Yep. And production capacity, yeah, both those things are challenges for us. Thanks, Bill. So, you can see that there's a range of things that you're going to need to work on. Yeah, and some of them are going to take you longer to address than others. But my experience is, unless you've got that sort of balance in place and you've got it sorted out, then you're not going to be in a great position to export, and it will cost you time and money. So you may be better off to sit back and just wait till you got all your ducks in a row. I'm not saying everything has to be perfect, but you need to understand that this is a costly and a risky endeavour, and you need to approach it from a position of strength, I guess would be my advice. Yeah, we're going to have the domestic market capacity. Thanks very much. Okay, so you can see that's a simple diagnostic. I had a look on the Austrade website as well. They've got an export diagnostic as well. You might want to have a look at their version of it. There's a number of these tools around to help you. But some of it is just getting your head around what it is that we need to do first before we race out and start throwing product into a container and trying to send it off somewhere. All right, so let's then talk about if that's when should we export. And for me, the when is when we've got at least a decent score and we've got most things at an appropriate level. It's what market should we approach first? And it's interesting. I've over the last few thousand years I've been consulting, I've done this with the clients for a number of times. And what we've created, I guess, is a what I call a gated approach. And you'll see this pop up in sort of management businesses sort of stuff. Yeah. Really, really well. Yeah. And that's good. So Michael's made a really good point here. You need to understand fully the market you're entering. And I guess this is what it's exactly what I'm going to talk about now, Michael. So great timing with that sort of comment. So we look at this sort of gated approach. And for me, a gated approach is one where you don't move if you don't have the right answers to open this gate, then you don't move to the next gate. All right, so it's just a simple gated approach, and it probably looks a little bit like this. So this is the model that I've used in the past. So when you decide you're going to export, whether you're ready or not, you might want to go and start exporting. Normally, most people will come up with some sort of market shortlist, where they'll have a look at potential markets and go, yeah, I think I'd like to go here. I think I'd like to go there. I think our product would fit well here. We've got some initial interest from over here, all that sort of stuff. So you come up with a short list. But what do you do then? My first gate for me is to do an initial market assessment of each of those markets and get an understanding of them before you move forward. If they pass that initial market assessment, then you'd go to what we call a market feasibility, where you do a quick and dirty, we'll talk about it in a second, but a quick and dirty P&L on that market just to see whether the numbers actually stack up for you. All right. That stacks up, then we do a detailed market feasibility, and we'll talk about that. And then finally, if that all stacks up, then you'd say, right, here's our plan to roll out in this market. Now, this, 4 gates may only take you, a couple of days to work through, or a day to work through, or, a week or two of elapsed time, but it's a process that's really important. A little bit of rigor here will save you some issues in the future. All right, so let's talk about the initial market assessment, which is this process of refining your shortlist. So what we've done here is a matrix, a decision matrix, if you like. Well, we've looked at a series of criteria on the left-hand side. We've then given each of those criteria a weighting, and then we've also given you a score. So a scoring, scoring criteria. So I'll take you through this in a bit more detail. Come up with a score. You multiply the score by the weight to give you a weighted score, and from that you can then say if we get a certain score, above a certain score, then we're a go or a no-go with that particular market. This is just a really useful thing to do, just to slide through and to do it. So let's have a look at a little bit more detail. So the first thing we want to do is work out what are our criteria, and then what are the scoring criteria that we're going to put in place for those. So let's just have a bit of a look at it. So, here we've got the factors, if you like, and these are the factors that I've used with clients, but you can easily substitute your factors in here for these factors. So I've said cultural fit, which is about assess any barriers that may occlude or disadvantage your products in that market. It could be religious, health, product aversion, or specific regulations that stop of it. For example, if you're going to a Muslim country and your product contains trace levels of alcohol, you may need to, I think it's less than about 0.05% or something, then more than 0.05%, then you may not fit into that country. There could be other cultural things. So cultural fit, so does your product fit? Ease of doing business. So how easy is it to do business in that particular market? Quick assessment of the legal system, currency, IP protection, banking systems, geographic locations, particularly about port access, if you're going to think thing is, and distribution networks, how well developed are they, and those sorts of things. In terms of risk then, internal security, political and social stability, cultural ethics, some of those sorts of things increase our risk factors, so we want to be careful about those. Market assessment, current market size, what is population, socioeconomic ability. So can they afford to pay? Do you have enough people in that country that can afford to pay for your product? Is probably important, particularly if you're delivering a premium product. Yep. Synergies with your current business. Is there something along the formulation of your product or the way you build it or put it into it that will give you some synergies? Maybe you don't have to have a new recipe for a particular country or whatever. You can actually ship it as is. So there's lots of good synergies with it. It could be about access to particular ingredients or anything else, particular health requirements, packaging, all that sort of stuff. You might have labelling laws that help you out and that sort of stuff. So is there any synergies in that space? And then think about its potential distribution partner. I think it's important if you go into these markets that you have somebody that's going to help you distribute your product. They need to be capable. Do they have partner recommendations? Good values and ethics, and are there any legal restrictions, for them looking after you? Again, if you've got a particular product, they may not be able to do that. So they're the factors. You can look at your own factors and work them out. But if we just sort of work through this here, so what I'd like to do is make sure we've got some guidelines for scoring. Otherwise, we can't remember why we score things higher or lower. So if things like, low scores, in this one say cultural fit, be high barriers to entry, strong religious, health, cultural hurdles to get over, and little or no product category for your product in that country. you might be introducing something completely new that they really don't have and they don't use, that would score quite lowly because you've got to spend a lot of time educating people. Neutral score is no apparent insurmountable barriers, and then, positive scores, 7 to 10 would be strong market openness, similar cultural religious alignment, developed or developing categories in that marketplace. Yep. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so I'm just looking at a question here. Yeah. Yeah. So I'll come back to that one, Bill. We just go down to, the next one, ease of doing business. So, we're talking about here legal systems and ease of doing business. So low score would be poor legal protections, volatile currency, high governmental control, and fragmented distribution. Whereas a strong one would be a good legal system, strong protection, currency stable, free trade agreements, sophisticated distribution present. So, you take those factors into consideration and give it a score. Does that make sense? So what you're going to do is build on these factors and create a score. Does that make sense? So now you can come up with your own factors here, or you're welcome to steal mine at any time. So let's have a look at this question from Billy. It says, my client's relationship with a great subsidiary we all have, we know and have an access to. Sorry, I'm having trouble with this. No, Sue's parent. Yep. Can I miss some of the gates? Yeah, you can, because it takes some of the risk factors out and some of the things out. But I wouldn't sort of miss them. I would just score them high in that case, Bill. Yeah. Does that make sense? I still score them, but you take all that into consideration because you've got some of that stuff sorted out. But you still may, even though you've got some subsidiaries and some other stuff over there, you may find that there's still reasons why you would score a little bit lower because of some of the government issues and other things that you can't address. Okay. All right. So let's just move some stuff around here. All right. So once you've come up with your factors and then what the scoring looks like, we need to think about weighting those factors. So the simplest way to do that is to say all the total weights need to add up to 100, and then you distribute them evenly. So if you've got 5 factors, they could have 20 points each, or you could distribute them like I have and break them up into some different things to give you some weightings around them. Now, just be mindful that the weightings will have a pretty big impact on the outcomes. So you want to be clear that there are some things that are more important to you than others. All right, so get your weightings right. They're the weightings that I've used with clients, not to say they're the right ones, but they're the ones that have worked for us well in the past. All right, and then you go through and you score that particular country. All right, so you give it a score, which is pretty easy. So score out of 10 based on these criteria here, and then this spreadsheet or you with a calculator can multiply the weight by the score to give you a particular score, add them up. The model I tend to use anything over about 400, everything below 400 is a no-go. Anything 400 to sort of 700, because this scores out of 1,000. Anything 400 to 700 would sit in an amber light for me, and then anything over 700 would be a green light. So 70% or better is a green light. Okay. So that's the way I look at it. But anything 400, below 400, you just discard it straight away. And then it just means that anything with an amber light, you've got to have a much, much better look at it, because it's not a clear-cut decision on what you do. All right. So once we've done that, you then, I guess, and the other thing, is people then often will say to me, well, where do I get all this information from? And there's a heap of place. A heap of information you can get. Google is your friend here. So use this data to fill out that sort of stuff. Now, this is actually some live data that my wonderful PA Ray, the amazing Ray, did for a client of mine. So she just got onto Google. We gave her some questions. So we looked for local pricing of the particular products we were looking for. Any market access information that we needed to know. So what are the requirements in terms of quarantine, biosecurity, that sort of stuff for those particular products. Any tariffs and trade barrier stuff we need to be aware of. Any statistics on local trade volumes and all that sort of stuff. So what's the volume of the market there? Top 5 distribution chains for that sort of product in that country. And could we find any business tips for foreigners doing business in that country? And Ray did a heap of these profiles for my client and pulled it together. So Google's your friend in this sort of space, but there's, so go and do your research. So don't just gut feel some of this stuff. Just go and find it and do your research, because it will pay off for you. And it doesn't. I'm not saying it didn't take Ray a minute or two. She had to work at it, but it was still using Google really well. So where to get information on these markets? So Austrade, the Austrade website actually has a whole heap of stuff. As I said, it's got a readiness indexes like similar to ours. It can give you advice. You can actually pay for some of that advice on particular markets. You can get good information. They can actually put you on this list of partners and other things you can get in touch with, and distributors and that sort of stuff. And they can do in-market research for you. But there's lots of good free advice on that Austrade side that's well worth looking at. They've got country information and a whole heap of stuff. The other place I've been to quite a bit is the CIA World Fact Book. Believe it or not, the CIA puts out a little fact book on different markets around the world, or different countries around the world, which includes a lot of up-to-date information on their economic status and all that sort of stuff. So use that. The US Department of Agriculture also puts out exporter guides, and obviously, you've just got to cut out the US bits and the US focus from it. But a lot of the information is similar for Australia. And you can search those up on Google. So if you just put up, USD exporter guide Singapore, it'll take you to that list. That's all pretty good. Lots of countries have websites, the government websites, and trade associations have websites that will give you some good information on, because they want to encourage you to import or to their country. And Google's your friend. Just Google your heart out. There's lots of good free information on Google, and if you're diligent, you'll actually find lots and lots of answers to your questions. All right, so does that make sense? So any questions there about doing that sort of that initial market assessment? Did it make sense? Do you reckon you could do one? Yep. Good. Yes. 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 Oh, excellent. Excellent. All right. So that's all good. Yeah. So everybody don't even have a no. So that's fantastic. All right. So it's just a simple assessment. Now, my gut feel is that you should be doing this for every market you want to go into. It doesn't have to take you a long time to do it. It's just about making sure you're doing your research and your due diligence right from the start. Because one of the big things that I find is everybody wants to export to the US, to the big markets. I could put the Chinese flag here as well. So everyone wants to go to the US or China. But those markets are huge, absolutely monstrously huge. There's 300 million people in the US. There's 1 billion plus people in China. Those markets are massive. And if you're not careful, those markets can actually consume your business very, very, very quickly. You can run out of working capital very quickly, while you might think, well, it's a great opportunity. Yes, it is a great opportunity, but it also comes with a great risk. So you may be better off to start smaller and work your way up. Now, I'm not saying that the US may not be a fantastic market for you, but everybody wants to go there. And it's very competitive. I heard a talk from Rod Drury at Xero at the Myriad conference in Brisbane just recently. He was saying that they stayed away from the US and they found traction in the US wasn't as good as it was in other countries. And he said the one way to think about it is if you can afford to have 10 salespeople, do you put them into an area where they've got great coverage and can get across a large proportion of the population, or do you put them into like America, where they just get swallowed up in the great mass? So that's sort of worth thinking about. The other way to think about some of these markets is, the US could be broken up into states. So you may look at the US state of Maryland, for example, and say, right, well, let's move into Maryland or California or somewhere, rather than trying to take on all of America. Can we just do it in one state? Similarly with China, everybody thinks China's one big market, but everybody I talk to who's doing work over there says once you get over there and spend a bit of time over there, you realize there are many, many markets or sub-markets within China. It's not a contiguous market. So well worth thinking about, but just be careful about racing off and going straight to America or straight to the really big guys, because you may pay the price. Okay, so gate 2 then. So we made it through gate 1, done our initial feasibility. Gate 2 then is, I guess, an initial initial feasibility, sorry. So we did our initial market assessment. We're now talking about an initial feasibility study. So does it make financial sense to us? But I'm not talking about, doing a really detailed analysis, but let's just think about some of the stuff that we might want to look at. So my recommendation is you do a simple profit and loss model, all right? And just use a spreadsheet to do this sort of stuff. What sort of volume and what sort of sale price can we get? So what sort of volume do you think we could ship? What sort of sale price do we get? And you might do it on an order by order basis or something else. We might want to build revenue. Volume and sale price, then build revenue. You want to look at your cost of goods sold. So what's it actually costing us to make this and deliver it within Australia? And then you want to add on it the additional cost of exporting, shipping, tariffs, testing, marketing support, all that sort of stuff. Yep. So you might want to add those additional costs on. Interest on funds, so you might have to fund some working capital. You might want to put that in there, and to get up with your export margin. So is it worthwhile for us to doing it, and at what scale? So what sort of volume do we need to be? Some of these costs could be quite fixed costs. So what scale do we need to use in order to start the thing that gets profitable? So you can use that analysis then to determine what minimum order volumes might be, what your credit policy might be, some of those sorts of things in order to minimize your risk in some of this space and to make it profitable for you. But do a simple P&L first, all right? So that makes sense. Got a question here. So from Tony, says, by way of example, I was at a factory in Shanghai with a main Coles buyer in Asia. They had 1,000 40-foot containers stacked up and ready to be shipped. Asked which ones for Coles, and the Chinese guy laughed and said, those 3 are right up at the back. The rest were all for Walmart. Yeah, that's right. So, the US market's massive. We think the Australian market's big, but it's massive. It's a great example. Thanks, Tony. Yep. We are very small fish in a massive pond. All right. So simple P&L is the way to do that, that feasibility and build that up, okay? So you want to get a feel for whether you can actually make some money doing this or not, and put some real costs in there, okay? And, use it to do your planning. All right, so if you get through that gate and you go, yeah, we can make some money, then you need to do, some due diligence on this whole thing before you get going. That may involve some market trips to actually build some relationships, see how the product would be handled, and maybe you can go watch a competitor's product go through, but see how it be handled in that market, what the supply chain looks like, what the marketing looks like, how it would be sold, because a supermarket in Australia or a department store in Australia will not be the same as a supermarket or a department store where you're going. Often we think, everybody's going to sell something in a Woolies or Coles equivalent, but often our products are sold in open markets and other places, completely different, corner stores, all sorts of different ways to where it'd be sold in Australia. So you want to go and have a look at that marketing stuff. So that's really important, but do your due diligence. So, one of the things to think about is a market entry strategy. So, you can use the feasibility analysis and even draw on some experience from yourself and from others, from other consultants you may speak to. There's some great export consultants around to determine your market entry strategy and your sales approach for different order quantities. All right. So one way to think about this is, is a phase one is, so many units, up to a certain number of units, minimum order quantity, and then up to a certain thing. You're just going to take ad hoc orders. They're going to get no marketing support from you, apart from your website and some other stuff, and no terms. So this is, might be the case. Phase two then could be, for a higher level of stuff, you still take ad hoc orders. They're not programmed orders, but you might give limited marketing support. So you may give them either a discount or put some money into marketing in that channel. So you may go over and you might do, if you've got a food product, you might do tasting support in supermarkets and other things, all right? But it could be limited, and there could be different terms. You may have limited terms for them around payment schedules and that sort of stuff based on the volume they're going to buy and their track record with you and that sort of stuff. And then phase three could be, at a certain level, they have programmed orders, they get marketing support, standard trade terms and all that sort of stuff. And you get big enough, they'll have their own profit and loss. You'd actually run it as a little subunit within your business. So use some of this feasibility to think about how you might take on the market, because very, very few of you is going to be able to go, well, let's ship 50 containers over tomorrow, and this is the way it's going to work. So you're going to start off with pallet loads and, smaller things. How are you going to handle that? And how's it all going to work for you All right, so think through your market entry strategy. In terms of your detailed feasibility, I guess what would you include in that? So I would think your export strategy. So what's our overall export strategy? What are we looking to do with export? Where do you want to go first? What sort of, where do you want to go? What sort of target markets are we going to follow up on? You want to do and these aren't in any particular order, by the way. You want to do a particularly good assessment of your distributor and partners, and a due diligence on them if necessary. If you go that down the track, get some good statistics on them. Go and meet them, talk to some of their existing clients, and really get to understand them. And so, do your due distribution, because your due diligence, because challenges will come when you've got distributors or partners who let you down. Again, you just want to make sure you do a detailed market assessment. You do your competitor analysis. You look at some marketing plans, look at a marketing budget, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, who's our target market in this country? What are the channels we're going to use? All that sort of stuff. I'm talking about a market assessment. So we're going to do a marketing plan, right? Detailed business environmental scan. We've already done some, but you want to get into it and really understand what the logistics are and the challenges are going to be. You want to build a logistics plan, quarantine, tariffs, shipping certification, in-country distribution, how are we going to get it around? Does it need to be refrigerated? Do we need a cool chain? All that sort of stuff. And really important. Values, bribery and corruption in many countries around the world is a normal standard way of doing business. And are you going to play the game? So I've got clients who've done it both ways. Some people said, "But to do a little bit of bribery here and there is okay, but we're not going to do anything major." And other clients have just said, "We'll just steer clear of it. We're not going to do it, and if it means we don't go to that market, we don't go to that market." There'll be some. Your values are pretty important. You want to make sure your values and your client values are in alignment, and often you won't understand that till you go over there and see how they treat other people and do other things. Some risk analysis. So what are the risks, and how are you going to mitigate them? Some big risks in exporting. The big one is you don't get paid. Or when they get the product that it's been damaged in transit, or the quality is not what they expected, all those sorts of things. So what are the risks and how are you going to mitigate them? And then do a detailed financial analysis, profit and loss, cash flow, balance sheet, production impacts, that sort of stuff. I'd encourage you to just don't do one, but evaluate some different scenarios. So, think about the scenarios. Think of a high, low, medium sort of strategy, if you like, if that's all you can think of. But evaluate some different strategies about what could go well, but if things go wrong, how does that kind of impact us? And you do want to do all those, and there's some great accountants out there that will really help you do that. I know we've got some of them online, so I know that for a fact. All right, so do your feasibility. All right, so any questions about feasibility about Gate 3? Or Gate 2 and Gate 3, actually. And for some of you may think this is overkill, but it depends on the level of investment you're prepared to make and how risk averse you are, whether you would step up into this space or not. Yeah, but I would encourage you to at least consider all the topics on this slide here in some sort of detailed analysis. Okay, looks like everybody's cool with it, so that's good. So we'll just move on, running a little bit behind schedule. And the last one is just a market rollout plan, which is just about making it happen. Nothing special here. What I've used in the past here is just this sort of annual operating plan structure. What are the big rocks? What are the 3 or 4 things we need to focus on? What are some of the key measures around those? And then what are the strategies and actions in each of those key rocks, in those big rocks? So no brain surgery required here at all. But let's just lay our plan out. If we're going to take on the Thai market, what does it look like? How do we do it, and what's our plan to make it happen? It could be, we go and do 3 or 4 site visits before we send some product, and then we send products. You might go, so I want to be part of a couple of trade delegations before I go anywhere. I want to have their trade delegations come to our business so they understand our business, and we go and build a relationship. And then we'll start off small, and I'm going to follow the first container load over or pallet load or whatever over and see how the product arrives and how they handle it and follow it through the supply chain. Okay, so there's some of the things you might put into that annual operating plan. Cool. All right, so nothing there. So any questions at this point? covered a fair bit of stuff, so it wouldn't surprise me if it'll take you a while to digest it. So I'm more than happy to take questions later. But if any questions that just spring to mind for you at the moment. Okay. Yep. Okay, good stuff. All right then. So let's just wrap it up then. So big question is, are you ready to export? Yep. So exporting is one of those things that I think you need to do some export readiness. So you can use our diagnostic, the questions there, and rate yourself against them. Or you can easily go and use the Austrade one on their website. And either way, you want to get some measure of are you ready to export? Should you be exporting, and are you ready to go? You want to have a gated process, right? I think you want to start looking at this stuff strategically, dispassionately. Come up with your short list, even short list. I think that anyway. I'm not going to make any jokes. Short list. Gate 1. Do initial market assessment. Okay, so what's that market assessment looks like, and you can use something like that decision matrix that I had up on the screen. You could Gate 2 is an initial market feasibility. So what can we do to actually to build this sort of market feasibility? Simple profit and loss. Just do a really dead simple profit and loss to make sure the numbers stack up initially if you even think about going to the next phase. Yeah, if your numbers stack up, and if they don't stack up, then you go, okay, well that market's not going to work for us unless something magically changes. But if it does, then you want to work into that sort of detailed market feasibility study and really put some effort into it. Understand your distribution partners, understand the logistics, get your head right around it, because the last thing you want to do is put a container of product on the sea, off to a market, and then it all go horribly wrong for you. Yeah, that's it. That's a learning experience you probably don't want to have. And then just do a simple market rollout plan. What are we going to do in this market? How are we going to take it on based on what we've talked about and what we know? What are the things that we need to do? All right. So that's your gated model, if you like. So there's the matrix I talked about. So use that to do your assessment. Do your research. So put some time and energy into it. Sit there with a glass of red wine and do your research. And I guess get a good understanding for what you're planning to do. Understand the impacts. So understand the impacts of taking on some big markets like the US and China, because the impacts on your business can be quite large. And a number of clients of mine, we've steered away from bigger markets for a while until we had the scope and the scale to handle them. And there are plenty of great stories about Australian companies that have raced off to the US and then just been swallowed up and spat out the back. So understand the impacts of the market that you're looking at. So that's the sort of plan. So build your plans, get everything right. And the next steps are, for you are to do some of this sort of stuff. So one of the things that I'm comfortable to do is to put this into some sort of process or a program for you, if you like. So there's enough demand for it. Happy to build an online program that steps you through each phase of the process, provides you with these customizable templates for each phase, links you to a variety of topics and resources that you could do, support you with some coaching and to question you on the plan, but probably also we could support you with some simple market research stuff as well, and do things. So I guess I'm thinking indicative pricing between $300 and $1,500, depending on the level of support that you choose. It could be more, could be less, but we'll do that. So what I think I'll do is send out a bit of a survey asking for your input into how we might build this program and if it would be of value to you, rather than me sort of, this field of dreams, build it and they will come is a wonderful movie premise, but sometimes in the real world it takes time and energy for not much return. So if there's enough support for this sort of thing, I'm really happy to do that. So we might send out a survey that you could fill out for us. It'd be really good to give us some feedback on whether it's worth doing. All right, so that's where we're going next. All right, I've got a question here, Bill. Yeah, no, it's not Bill. So it's not part of the Mindshop stuff, but it's we're all on the club together. There's no reason I won't share it with you. So so that's that's where we're at. I hope you've enjoyed it. We've got another webinar coming up in about 6 weeks' time, but I haven't actually settled on a title for it yet. We settled on this one only because I had so many people ask me questions about exporting that I thought it was timely to do one. And I guess that's all. So if you've got any questions, please type them in now. But if not, I hope you've enjoyed the webinar, and we'll look forward to seeing you at our next one. And I wish you a good night.